there is no such thing as an automatic win or loss. And the way that Victor and I talked about this before, and the way that I completely agree with is, there is always something worse. Just when you think that a team has done something which should guarantee them an automatic loss, there is always going to be something worse. There is no thing, or there is nothing that a team can do to automatically lose or automatically win a debate, including equity violations, including, well, short of not speaking at all, and even then, someone who vomits might do worse than something. Yep.
So, like, that's interesting because in most tournaments we normally do get like the code of conduct is like separate to.
Yeah.
So if they say so if they do say something that's like absolutely vilifies a particular group, you wait at the end of the debate, you still have to like weigh up the like how much do you penalise them? Like,
yeah.
How much can you allow it to like affect?
Yeah, that's a reasonable question. And I'm going to say to you the same things they say at tournaments, which is you're not the equity officers of a tournament or bar and VADA. You're not the equity officers of the club. It is not your job. Even VADA, when he's adjudicating this debate, it is not your job to judge the equity violations or presume the innocence or guilt of anyone doing those things. It is your job to judge the debate. As luck would have it, most things that are equity violations like sexism and racism are also massive logical problems, are also terrible arguments that are unpersuasive for a variety of reasons. So 99% of the time, there's going to be a happy confluence of events, which means that the racist, sexist, obnoxious team is the team that loses. So there's no such thing as an automatic win or loss, but the kinds of things that you think would lead to an automatic win or loss tend to. But it is important to note that a team, and this happens perhaps more often in schools debating, but potentially would happen in freshers as well, as people transfer to uni debating. It's important to note that people who might say things that are objectionable might still win the debate because the rest of the content of what they say or the other team might be worse. So it's really important to judge the debate on its merits and not enter into the equity of it or anything like that. Who wins the debate? 3 choices. Is it the most persuasive team? Is it the highest scoring team? Or is it the team that wins on matter, that is the issues of the debate? Hands up for the first one. Hands up for the second one. Hands up for the third one.
Okay, I think people didn't vote.
It doesn't matter. The answer is, of course, all of them. The point of this slide isn't to make me feel smart. It's a happy side effect. No, the point of this slide is to say that we have a lot of rules in debating, and especially in training and in adjudication and everything that we do, we really get caught up in those rules, right? Definitions, models, even ifs, mutual exclusivity, like we really get caught up in all of those rules and those like roles and all those words that we like to use. The important thing is that we have those rules for a reason, and that reason is to ensure that the most persuasive team wins. We have scoring as a way of clarifying the reasons why the most persuasive team wins. Matter is usually the most dominant reason why a team will win, especially at uni debating when method and manner tend to equalise a little bit more. We have all these rules and they're for fairness and objectivity and consistency, but persuasion is the ultimate aim of the game and is the ultimate way that you judge who the best speaker, team and winner of the debate were. I think that's something that gets lost a little bit, but something that we should keep in mind. Everything that we're going to discuss now is in the service of identifying which is the most persuasive team. I'm now going to go through the 3 criteria and examine things that you will look at when assessing those 3 criteria. That's not to say that they should be treated in isolation from each other all the time, but that is to say that there are different things that you can look for in all of them. Firstly, there are 2 parts to matter. Logic is the first one. Why is something true? Does one thing follow from another? And if they do not, why not? Can things be reasonably inferred from each other using common sense and common logic? It's very hard to explain what logic is. In this, Sonak has, as part of his rebuttal guide, I think some common logical fallacies that people engage in. That's a useful tool to look at what logic isn't. It's very hard to say what logic is apart from what I've got up there. That's the first way that you assess an argument. Is it logical? Does it make sense? Importantly, have they tried to make it make sense? Has the speaker, has the team put analysis into the argument explaining why it's true, not just asserting that it's true? Logic is a key part of matter, the other half is relevance. Something can be a perfectly logical, sequential argument, but if it does not support the conclusion that a team is trying to reach, or the topic or the side of the topic they are defending, that is not a good argument and it does not make for good matter. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Logic and relevance. They're pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised how often sometimes people veer off on either of them. It's analysis and a link to the topic. Common parts of an argument. Any questions on judging matter? We'll get to that more later, but this is how you should approach every argument. Luckily, these things are usually tested for you by the other teams in the debate. Like the logic, the relevance of an argument is tested by the other speakers. So you can then look at the argument, the way it was refuted, and decide for yourself which one was stronger. Next up is manner. Manner is underjudged, in my opinion, and in everyone's opinion, frankly, and yet no one still does it because everyone's scared. There are absolutely some objective things about manner that you can look at when you're an adjudicator, that you can make decisions about, and you can reward people for, or penalise them for. They can be split into vocal and non-vocal elements. So firstly, vocal. Volume, pace, tone, clarity. Those are things that are not judgment calls, that are not, I was just moved by that speaker, they had X factor, they had pen. You do not have to resort to those kinds of things. If the volume, pace, tone and clarity of the speaker were good or bad, you can legitimately adjust their manner score as a result of that. Word choice. This is something that is underappreciated, but I think the more debating you see, the more you appreciate someone who's an efficient speaker, who uses the right words rather than lots and lots of words to try and get to the point. And the best speakers I've seen, people who've been world's best speakers like Kylie Lane, like Naomi Orem, have been very efficient with their words because they choose the right ones. Lastly, under vocal, I've got humour. Humour can be both good and bad. I encourage you to reward a speaker that is funny in aiding their argument, in aiding what they are saying. But I also am willing to say that speakers who use humour inappropriately or who distract from what they're saying with humour should not be rewarded and perhaps should be punished if it is a particularly egregious offence. Non-vocal, things like gesture, eye contact, body and stance. You've been watching me speak for about 10 minutes. I think you will have noticed a lot of particularly non-vocal problems that I've had in my speech. Can anyone point them out? You don't have to pick on all of them, just things that I've done. Yeah? Yeah. Other things?
Keep like holding your hands like you don't know what you're saying.
Yeah. Other things?
You're fiddling a bit with your hands.
Yeah. I've had hands in my pockets before.
Yeah.
I thought you were doing pretty well.
That's just because I complimented your words before. That's fine. It's important to notice those things. And they're not deal breakers, right? I'm still communicating. I'm still being more or less effective in my communication. Luckily, I have a PowerPoint friend helping me do that. But it's important that those are the things that you should look out for when giving feedback. And there's also just the elements of good manner. Someone who has gesture which supports and doesn't distract from what they're saying. Someone who makes good eye contact. I'm generally pretty good with eye contact. Other people are not so good, but they are really good at controlling their stance and controlling their body. It's give and take. Manner in particular is a holistic experience. So even though some of those elements might be there, some of those elements might be not, some might be stronger than others, if the overall picture is someone who is conveying things clearly and persuasively, then their manner is good. These are just ways to break that up if you choose to. So that's manner. The final one, everyone's friend, method. Method is like a crutch that new adjudicators use because it's the most objective criteria. It's things like structure. It's things like structure, and it's things like timing. Guys. There's a whole year of this to come. Plenty of time to laugh at. Method is a crutch that new adjudicators use when they're afraid of making judgment calls about manner and matter. Do not. You can consider method, and you should, and there is probably more to method than meets the eye, but do not ever, I don't want anyone to say they made a decision purely based on method, and I don't want to hear that either, because there's a reason this is worth half as much as matter and manner. So what is method? It's structure. That's pretty clear. That's stuff about clarity as well, and that's really useful. Usually you'll find if someone has good structure, it makes it easier for them to have both good manner and good matter. A well-structured argument is one where you can see the logic, where there's more likely to be all the steps in place, where the relevance is more likely to be explained. Likewise with priority and timing. If you give appropriate timing to an argument, it is more likely to be a strong argument. If you have the time to make a point well, you're less likely to speak quickly, which means your manner has a better chance of being good. Timing isn't actually the be-all and end-all and should be viewed, I think, in context with priority. So, a good piece of rebuttal that comes at the end of the third affirmative speaker's speech is not just problematic if it was 30 seconds long, but problematic because it came at the end of their speech at all. Ideally, things that are good should be, if not at the start of a speech, because a third speaker has 8 minutes of rebuttal to fill, but in a central place in the speech, emphasised. The speaker should control the priority of their arguments of their rebuttal, and that should be demonstrated in their method. The final and probably the most forgotten element of method is responsiveness. If people don't rebut arguments, it doesn't just affect their matter score, it should also affect their method score, and you should consider it as such. Responding to the dynamics of the debate, if some issues have fallen out of the debate and other issues are prominent, and a speaker recognises this, their method should be recognised as well. And this is how, at Austral style, you start getting like a 17 for method. When you don't just have really good timing and really good structure, but when you've made judgment calls, and when a speaker has made judgment calls about what to emphasise, what to spend time on, and what not to because it's unimportant, and when you, as an adjudicator, view those judgment calls as correct, that is when they have excellent method. Does that make sense to everyone? Structure, priority, timing, responsiveness.
Yeah. Just kind of back on something you were talking about earlier with like a logically unsound matter argument.
Yeah.
If someone gives that inappropriate attention, like they skim over it so it stands even though it's very clearly logically unsound, do you reward that argument for like staying untouched in the argument, or do you penalise that team for not
This is probably like the most vexed issue. And the reason it's so vexed is because it also has the potential for people entering the debate. And it's something I was going to deal with later, but we may as well deal with it now.
Sorry.
It's fine. There's no hard and fast answer, but what I would recommend is this, that if someone says something that you can really easily, and you think that any reasonable average debater would be able to find that as being illogical, that it doesn't make sense, and that's why it doesn't stand, you can feel free to, if not dismiss that argument, then view it as of minimal importance. Even if the other side doesn't get the extra points for pointing out its problems, that doesn't mean that the first side gets to pretend like it's a perfect argument. So view it minimally. If, however, you only know that the argument is wrong because of specialist facts that you have, or you think that your ability to notice a subtle contradiction is so acute that ordinary reasonable debaters wouldn't be able to notice it, then I don't think it's reasonable for you to penalise the team that much. Does that make sense? It's still a line ball call, but you do not have to wait for another team to point out a massive logical flaw in an argument before you, the adjudicator, can notice that. Factual stuff is a little bit harder. Only if things are like outlandishly wrong and you can tell that they're outlandishly wrong can you then enter the debate and go, no, I'm not going to believe that. If both sides agree on a set of facts, generally speaking, those facts stand. I'll give you an example. Victor and I today we've been at the end of 2008, and we were in a debate about the Malaysian National Service, right? So they have conscription in Malaysia, and Victor and I think were closing government or closing opposition. Anyway, we were in favour of the Malaysian National Service, and we, for some reason, thought that the National Service involved a civilian component, where you go and you paint stuff, and you build stuff, and you carve out aqueducts and whatever. I don't know why, I'd heard that once and I thought it was true, and so we based our whole extension about the benefits of painting shit. And in that debate, we were being adjudicated by Tate, who was just the DCA of Worlds, and who is Malaysian himself. And he knew these were false facts that we were saying. But it was a bit heated debate. We still came second because no one in the debate said that's just untrue. They rebutted it and said reasons why it was not a good enough reason to have conscription, and they rebutted it on its merits, assuming that it was true. So even though Tate knew that we were 100% wrong, he could not enter the debate and say that because that was not an ordinary, reasonable bit of knowledge, right? That was specialist knowledge that he had because he was Malaysian. And so he let it stand, we got second, and he was way unhappy about it.
Would you guys have been if they pointed out that it was incorrect?
Yeah, although I'm worried about if they had pointed it out, because I suspect that I would have just been like, I spoke to them and I would have just told Victor to just be like, no Victor, defend it, say that it is true. And then we probably would have been fucked because Tate would have had enough ammunition to bust us down to 3rd or 4th.
Sort of related point, if there's a fact, some specialist knowledge that's being contended by the sides, what do you do if you as the adjudicator don't know? If one side's asserting this is true.
Yeah, this is the brilliant position of being the adjudicator. You sit there and you go, did either side give me a better reason to believe that they were correct? And this is where the best teams flourish. When there's a disputed fact and one team says, well, how can I prove to you that that fact is more likely to be correct? Well, why is that statistic there? It's because this many people are more likely to do this. It's because in similar situations this has happened. If they're able to back it up and defend it, you can believe them. If not, call it a draw. Do not award the victory for that fact to either side, and then analyse the debate from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, question?
Yeah, but like that only works if it's like a sort of a separate fact. If this was about the Malaysian service, and they said no, it's not, and Tate wasn't Malaysian, and like the bloke had no idea what was going on, how do you identify? Because that's pretty crucial to your extension.
Right, and that's why I think in that situation we would have been punished, and we should have been punished still. If there's a fact that is in dispute, that is much more important to one team than another, then that makes the arguments of that team weaker, right? Because the very fact that the fact is in dispute makes the whole chain of argumentation that they've got weaker. If another team has been able to create arguments not based on that one contingent fact, based on things that are in agreement between both sides, but maybe the consequences are in disagreement, then that team's doing a better job. You should be careful, however, as adjudicators, to not just reward teams that go, that's not true, 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 to just muddy the waters on everything. If they don't back it up with anything except that's a lie, then that too is a lie. Do not reward those people.
One last question on the topic. If you know something is blatantly wrong, but someone gives an awesome justification somehow despite that, can you sort of give them the point even though you know with your specialist knowledge?
If it's specialist knowledge, you cannot. If it's general knowledge, maybe you can. If it's like really general knowledge and they still give an amazing reason why that's not true, that person is a sociopath. And they murder animals. If it's general knowledge and you're really comfortable with it being general knowledge, you do not have to accept it, no matter how persuasive that person is. Because usually people will leverage their authority, their age, their status as being from Sydney 1-1-1 to try and push through things that they're not sure about. You do not have to accept that.
Just when it comes down to this kind of factual debate, and one team is actually, like, I guess, I want to say bullying, but like being more, I guess, assertive with certain set of facts, and like pushing another team down. Is that something that you can take out from things like method and manner? Like if they're just
if it's a manner problem, then you can definitely make it a manner problem. The thing for me is like assertiveness is a problem of matter. That if you just assert something without offering logic or reasons why it's true, then that is not a strong argument. The best teams will take a fact that's in dispute and even if it, right? They'll say, we think that fact is not correct. We think it's not correct for these reasons, because it doesn't sit with all the other facts that we know, because it doesn't make sense based on what we do know about human behaviour, whatever. But even if that fact were true, here's why we still should not do what your team says. These are perennial problems in debates. And the way that good teams get over it is the way they always have, by getting above it. And the best debates do not occur at this weird fact level because it doesn't help anyone. People agree on the facts and they analyse conclusions differently. Any other questions on this? I understand it's a tough thing, and that's why it's good to get that question. I did, however, anticipate it, as you'll see. So, now on to the meat and bones of this. How to adjudicate. I know you're wondering, what has Amit been talking about so far then? Never mind. When you're sitting there watching 6 speakers, or at Austral's 8 speeches, this is one suggestion for how to reach a decision. This is the way that I go about it. I'm going to present a few options. The first option is this, presenting a third speech for the whole debate. That's generally what I aim to do. So I will, as an adjudicator, sit there and go, which have been the issues that dominated this debate? Well, there's been a question about consent, there's been a question about regulation of the black market, and there's been a question about the effects on society. Alright, what have the teams said on all of those 3 or 2 or 4 issues? Well, the affirmative said this, the negative said this. Who do I think won each issue? Well, the affirmative said this, and the negative responded with a few layers of response, and the AF just dropped it. So I think maybe the negative won that because they had a more robust response to this issue. There are many ways that teams can win those things, right? The point is that you look at the issues in the debate, try and analyse which team won which one for what reason. Importantly, is the last point here. When you are critically evaluating those 3, 2 or 4 themes of the debate, consider method and manner within those as reasons why those issues fall to either side of the house. So, a team that argues something and argues it persuasively and more persuasively across 3 speakers, perhaps allocates more time to it, is more structured in its approach to those arguments, is more likely to win on that issue. Because not only do they have good matter, but their manner and their method come through in sort of allocating the win of that issue to them. The final part of this style is then deciding the relative importance of each theme of the debate. Not all themes are equal, right? In a debate, like the one I was listing before, where consent, regulation and society are themes, maybe the issue of society has been underdealt with by either team, you know? It's been the second argument of second speaker for both teams, hasn't really been tossed around that much. And maybe the negative team won that third issue, but maybe that third issue wasn't central or wasn't important. So even though they won that issue, it might not affect the outcome of the debate that much. It might narrow the margins slightly. So what are the issues of the debate? Who won them? How did method and manner affect who won them? And how important was each issue to the overall debate? That's how I choose to go about adjudicating, and that's how I choose to present the adjudication as well, like a third speech of the debate. These are the issues. This is who won, this is why. This is how method and manner affected who won the matter, and as a consequence, this is why this team won. Does that method make sense to people? It requires a little bit more work, maybe, but by and large, it's the method that will leave the teams feeling most comfortable. Because you've shown them that you've listened to everything in the debate, that you've balanced the responses, and that you have actively listened to what has happened. Teams hate losing, right? But what they hate most is losing when an adjudicator sounds like they didn't listen. Sounds like they present a skewed version of the debate. Because then it's like they never had a chance. If an adjudicator hears what they said and didn't allocate as much worth to it as they think it should, well, that's much harder to argue against. That's much harder to feel hard done by, because they heard you, they just didn't believe you. And that's something that you can repair next time. So debate is much more likely to be willing to accept a decision if you have comprehensively dealt with what they said.
Okay, just quickly with that.
Yeah.
If you've given a decision and you're looking at individuals, trying to get individual feedback, would you suggest trying to get individual feedback, like based on what the other team might have seen, or you as a third party kind of might have seen, or just as someone, like, do you take a side in that?
Yeah, feedback can operate a little bit differently to the decision. The decision is reflective about what happened. Feedback can be about what should have happened. And so you still approach it as you, and you approach it as an objective third party, but here you can feel more comfortable saying you should have done instead of you did. And in a decision, I don't want to hear you should have done this, except for you should have responded to that, and the fact that you didn't respond meant that that argument stood, right? That's just analysis of the debate. So you can do more entering of the debate when you're giving constructive feedback to the teams and the speakers. That's one method. The next method is using the criteria of matter, manner, and method as your guide explicitly. So, and this is something that I think new DAB adjudicators use a little bit. Where after you hear a debate, you go through those 3 criteria and you say, well, this team won on matter because this argument and this argument were well explained, and they weren't rebutted effectively by the opposition, so they still stood at the end of the debate. This team won on manner because these 2 speakers were much more persuasive, engaging, passionate than any others in the debate, and they were both on that team, so they both had higher manner scores. This team won on method for this reason, and based on that, the win has gone to blah. There's obvious flaws in that, and it's a slightly less sophisticated approach, but if you feel like this is more comfortable, especially as a way to start off, it's still analysing the major parts of the debate, matter, manner, and method. And And for some people, this is more effective. And for some debates, this is more effective. Usually debates where the win is decided more by things like manner and method than by things like matter. So more likely in junior debates, right? When you get to university debating, things like method and manner tend to equalise a little bit. People know how to speak, they speak in their individual ways, they're clear, they make their points. Method and manner tend to equalise, matter tends to be where the debate is, which is why I go with my previous style, which is using matter as the central prism to analyse the debate. There's nothing wrong with this, especially if you do look at all the elements of the debate. Now I'm going to ask Ravi to pay attention back here for a sec and just sort of say, what I've done is I've given a couple of methods of approaching the adjudication, of thinking about the decision. If Ravi has anything else, Meredith was meant to be here but she left. If Ravi has anything else.
I think that the way that Amit presented that first way is I think the way that I present most of my education. The way I think about it I think is a little bit more, for want of a better word, simplistically. Now, like ultimately debating is about persuasion, and I try and think if I was like a policymaker or just an average person, which would I kind of vote for or support? Which side is giving me the most kind of coherent and consistent and like persuasive case for going down, like doing this or not doing this, as the case may be. Like that's I think ultimately what is always overriding. And I think that sometimes debaters and adjudicators both forget that it's about thinking about persuasion. And the ultimate aim has to be about the broader topic, so that when you think about an argument and an issue in the debate, maybe it's not that important because it doesn't really sway you. Maybe it's a simple issue because it does sway you on that issue. Again, I echo what Amit says about matter and method, and that I think that those things enhance and I think modify matter rather than trumping it necessarily. Which I think is a problem with the way that technically we adjudicate that. Anyway,
I think it's more objective.
Yeah, well, like I think it's only a problem with the way the rules are set up, but
yeah. The best adjudications I've seen are ones that collect meaning as they go. So they start off talking about however you want to like set up the structure of the adjudication, but they collect meaning and they start a narrative of the debate, all leading to a final conclusion, which is this team persuaded me that this side of the topic was more correct. So maybe that's a macro way to think about it. Just a note on note taking. Victor suggested that I put up a format of note-taking, but I just don't think that's necessary. In your notes, you need a section for what they said and what you think about what they said. Some people like to have a separate section at the bottom or along the side for, some people like to have a section along the side for what their comments are. That's fair enough. That way you have like a central area, which is like, this is what they said, and you have a tick, or you have a WTF, or you have a please explain some more, sir, or whatever you want to write in your note. And some people like to have like a little section elsewhere for manner and method. And if that's what you'd like to do, that's fair enough. I tend to have like the main bit where I write everything, and I'll like have maybe a red pen where I write my comments. And I technically draw a line down the side, but it doesn't, like stuff goes everywhere. And I don't keep specific notes about the manner that much. Sometimes I'll write a few things at the top because it's what strikes me usually when they start speaking. And in terms of method, I rarely keep notes on method apart from with school kids because firstly, method's rarely an issue, and secondly, you can look on the page for how good a person's method is based on how neat your notes are. Maybe this isn't the same for everyone, but for me, my notes will reflect the speech. If it was simple and clear and easy to follow, so will my notes. If it was all over the place, so will my notes be. Which is maybe perhaps unfair to the speaker, the tough shit. The second bit here is analysis, which is do you analyse and evaluate the arguments as they're presented, or do it all at the end? These are the two positions. One option is that you just try and neutralise the critical side of your brain and just write. Write down what they say, write it in as much detail as you feel comfortable writing down, and then only once the debate has concluded, at the end of the third neg or at the end of the reply, depending on the style, then you go back through things and you start critically evaluating who's going to win and who's going to lose. I think Victor is more of a fan of that style, and that perhaps explains why his adjudications take a little bit longer. And I'm not even joking, because he generally takes longer in reading over things. My approach is to analyse as I go. When I hear an argument, I write down my responses to it. And for me, it's just because it's impossible for me not to do that. as I hear an argument, I have like responses to it. I think that's bullshit, or yep, that makes sense, or that's a really good example, I'm glad you used that, or whatever. And so it's impossible for me not to analyse the debate as I go. That doesn't stop me from rereading, and I look back over my notes to make sure I've considered everything that was said and everything that was contributed by all the speakers. But I do analyse the debate as I go, which means that, barring a very effective, one way or another, third speaker for the negative team, I start generating my idea of the debate as I go. Yeah.
Do you try and structure what they say if they're not doing a particularly good job of it, or you just dump it as it comes?
I try and structure it for me, but it's inevitably much easier if they do it, because here's the thing, if you try and structure their thing, you don't know when they're onto a new point, you don't know when they're onto a new thing, when it's linked and when it's not. So I generally try to, because you have to, so that you can read over it, so you can give feedback or whatever, but it's much harder. Finally is dangers, and this is what I was alluding to earlier. Don't finish arguments for speakers if they haven't finished them, and don't keep incomplete notes. Something that some adjudicators do when they're lazy is they'll just write the titles of arguments, particularly common arguments, role of government, consent, whatever. They'll just write the title or one thing underneath it, and that probably isn't fair to the speaker, to the complexity that they gave it, or to the particular version of that argument that they presented. Don't try to take complete notes. That isn't to say you have to write down verbatim everything the speaker is saying. That is just that whatever the main thrust of their argument is, you record.
See, one of the problems I have when I'm adjudicating this is that I get caught up in what they're saying, the actual language that means me trying to write that down word for word, because I assume that if I write it down differently, I'm going to take it differently. Is there a way to best write it down so that you get the argument properly without
that's a really legitimate concern, right? Because if you start paraphrasing everything, then you tend to like their arguments more because you put it in your own language, and you tend to agree with your own language if it's yours, right? I think what you just have to figure out is what you can and can't do that with. So, if there's particularly effective or ineffective language, effective or ineffective analysis or example, I try to write those down verbatim, and sometimes I actually put them in quotation marks in my notes so I can tell when I'm reading it, they said that, oh my god, why did they say that? But other times, I just write down the bits of the argument that I will need to compare it to other stuff and to recount it effectively to them.
At the end of the debate, do you remember what the first speaker said and what their points were without looking at notes, or just completely gone?
I tend to, right? Because I'm an oral learner. And so, I can remember most debates I've been in. I struggle to remember stuff that I read and that I write, but I remember things that I say and things that were said to me. So, my style of adjudicating is a little bit easier because I write stuff down, but I have a good memory of what went on, even if I don't have complete notes on it. But here's the thing, if you're judging at Australs or Worlds or even Easters where there's 3 debates in a day, maybe I do remember that for one debate, but I'm not going to remember what first app said in the morning after I've seen however many speakers at the end of that day.
Yeah, because I kind of get lost, and then when someone's rebutting something, or if I can't really follow what they're rebutting, or have to look back and just get lost. In which case, maybe the right thing for you is writing down what the speaker said and taking a moment between speeches to go back over it. What was the main points they made? Okay, and then having that maybe even in front of you when you're writing down what the next speaker said and they're rebutting something, and you go, wait, is that a fair analysis of what that speech was? Actually, I don't think it is. You control the debate, and that's something I'll emphasise again later, but you control the debate. You can take a minute between speakers. Some people don't, but that's them. Whatever leads you to get the fairest and best decision is correct. So that's just a note on note taking. Any other questions? Yep.
So what amount of detail do you note take? Like when you write, what's actually on the left-hand side of the page?
Yeah. It's a good question. As much as I need to. It depends on the speaker and the argument. If something is simple, I'll write less. If something is very complex, like with a lot of detail in the explanation and the analysis and the example, then I'll try and write down the complexity because I'm less likely to remember it. Right? So it depends on the speaker and it depends on the debate and it depends on the content of what's happening.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like when I'm watching very, very good debates, I'll write down more because I'll need to. I remember talking to Bobo, who adjudicated the Cork World's Grand Final, and she said she kept 4 pages on each speaker. Because it's a World's Grand Final, and if there's ever a time where you want to get down as much as possible, that's it. Yeah. And so, I tend to vary the length of my notes as well. So in DAV, I'd rarely give anyone over half a page, even at A grade. But I tend to give all university debaters
I tend to try and make a summary of like pretty much all their arguments, and then often I miss out the stuff because I'm always writing too much.
Yeah, I don't think you need to summarise if you have reasonable notes from the speech. I think that's just making extra work for you. But if that's what works for you to reach a decision, then that's what works for you. Any other questions? No? Reese, you fine? Yeah.
What?
What a drunk.
He hasn't died yet.
Some more bits in my how to adjudicate section. Scoring. Nearly everyone at the end of a speech writes an indication of what they thought that speech was worth. That indication gets more accurate the more debates you see, because you just get a better idea of what is likely to be above, below average, and by how much. There's quite a comprehensive list in here on page 27 of scoring range and what it means at Austral style, which is also Eastern style, but without reply. There is nothing wrong with having a preliminary estimation of what you think a speech is worth based on just seeing that speech. The most important thing is that you are willing to change it and reevaluate it as it happens. So like, particularly early on in an adjudicator's career, you'll see a first draft that you think is crap or good, and by the end of the debate, it'll actually be quite different, because the first draft that you thought was amazing actually left a lot of really important things out that you didn't notice until the rest of the debate happened, or vice versa. A first draft that you think is not that impressive, maybe a 75 or a 76, you see the rest of the debate, you think those speeches were good, above average, but not as good as the first draft, so actually maybe they were higher above average than you thought. The important final note about scoring is that scoring should only ever be subservient to the decision. And this is why speaker tabs are fake. Because the decision comes first, and the margin comes second, and the individual speaker scores come a distant third. And so, while we would love to be able to give an accurate score on what everyone deserved, based on whether they were above average on matter, manner, and method, realistically, those things are subservient to the correct decision and the correct margin. If you think the debate narrowly went to the affirmative team, but your scores as you add them up give a clear win to the neg, well in that situation you probably actually want to rethink your decision, because there's probably a reason that you wanted to give it to the neg. But make sure that you make your scores fit your decision, and usually not the other way around. Pardon?
I always feel really guilty though if I have to adjust people's scores.
Yeah, I always adjust up.
Oh really?
Yeah, because it's free. You know, there's no cost to giving someone an extra point if you think their team won anyway.
But then if I put them on the same level as someone who I thought was better than them, and then I feel like I'm not giving them.
Yeah, then that's a marginal thing, you know?
Just do it.
Yeah, that's all you can do. The decision comes first, the fidelity of the decision comes first. A final note about your instincts. Instincts about how a debate goes is what everyone has. Everyone at the end of a debate, except in a really close debate, has a gut feeling about whether it went to the app or the neg. You must find a way to justify your decision without referring to feelings or instinct or anything that is not intellectual or like cerebral. People will not accept a decision based on feelings. It happens. People say, oh, I just didn't buy that. But teams are never satisfied if you say, I just didn't buy that, or rarely satisfied. Find a way to justify the debate based on everything that we've discussed above, all those little things that you can refer to that were done well or poorly by a speaker or a team, a reason that you can give. This doesn't mean your instincts are wrong. Often, very often, they're correct. Your instincts will be the decision, and it's really hard to give a decision against your instincts because then you're faking it. But your instincts are just not sufficient. Find other, more objective reasons why a team won or lost. Now, how to oral.
Innuendo.
There's nothing funny yet. In our opinion, your oral decision should proceed like this. Number 1, the decision. Who won? We're not in DAB anymore. There is no reason to make people wait for a 10-minute oral adjudication before they find out whether they won or they lost. People do not pay attention to you if they are trying to figure out what every word you said means. Just tell them up front, it won't ruin anything. Even if it makes the negative team not listen to you, that's fine. That team was a dick anyway. Next, the reasons for that decision as clearly presented as possible. Just as we expect debaters to have good structure and clarity, So you have to as well. Thirdly, your feedback to the teams about the whole debate, and that's things that like matter that was important to the whole of the debate, so like an issue that spanned across the entire debate or all the speakers, or common issues between the speakers, like you all spoke too quickly or something like that, and also give feedback to each team. So here is your case, here's what you could have added, here's what you could have taken away. Tactics as well. It would have been better if you put this argument first because. It would have been better if you'd been more explicit in your model about this because. And finally, individual feedback privately after the debate. That's how we think you should proceed with your oral decision. Sometimes it'll be different, and as you proceed with your adjudicating career, as you increase in confidence, you can mix that stuff up. Usually, if people have been adjudicated by me, I start with a bit of general feedback about the debate, about what I thought about it, things that were maybe done well, things that could have been done to make the whole debate better. The danger with doing that as a young adjudicator, and this is kind of hypocritical I know, is that it starts off with you sounding like you're entering the debate. It starts off by saying, here's how the debate should have been, and so now the team that was closest to that wins. And realistically, I get away with that because I'm older. So, in the interest of maximising your effectiveness, start with who won, then the reasons for that, then your feedback. Any questions on oral technique? Come on. Alright. How to give feedback? Please give feedback that's constructive. Saying you are shit is not as constructive as you think, Reese. Nor, to be fair, is saying that you need to revisit the basics of debating. That is not... Make sure that it's stuff that people can work on. Like, speak slower. That's good. That's something someone can work on. Be better is not anything, you know? Just make sure it actually is constructive, because otherwise it's unfair and useless. It just makes people feel bad. Next, the compliment sandwich is really useful with younger debaters. Here's something you did well, here's something you need to work on, here's something you did well. Especially with all those people in the next room who are learning how to debate, who you will adjudicate in freshers. You don't want to scare them off debating. You want them to enjoy this, because everything is better if more people debate.
And there are revenue sources.
So, correct. This is actually easier to do when I do DAB adjudicator training, because it's literally their revenue source. Get them to come back, and you get more customers. But there's an important point here that I want to point out, particularly which is something that new adjudicators, I think, do too much. Acknowledging the strengths of a team or a speaker doesn't mean you're a weak adjudicator, and it doesn't mean that you don't notice things, and it doesn't mean that you can't be critical. Be critical, but also be willing to say when a team does something well. It means that you are demonstrating that you saw the whole debate and that you're being reasonable and fair. Too often, people don't give positive feedback at all because they think, well, I will look like I'm just sucking up to them, or like they are better than me and they won't respect me. There is nothing wrong with giving a mix of good and bad feedback. It shows that you are reasonable and saw the whole debate.
Just like, if people start challenging you, what's the best way to smack them down? This might be more relevant.
The best way to smack them down is not to smack them down. The best way is to say, I've given my decision, I'm giving you the reasons for that. If you want to make a proper complaint about me, insert complaints mechanism, but unfortunately I cannot change that decision. So, tell them to go see a DCA or the CA, tell them to go write bad feedback about you, but say, look, I've given my decision, here's the reasons for it. If you'd like more reasons, I'm happy to talk to you more about the debate, but I cannot change that. And people sometimes just want to vent. So you just stand there and go, yep, oh yeah, no, they did speak over time, that's so true. But then just go back, and if you have some good reasons why a team won or lost, 9 times out of 10 that'll be enough. Most teams are like normal people. Finally, give examples from the debate itself. Wherever possible, people like to see that you're paying attention. Like, it's very helpful if you can give examples from the debate. So that's feedback. Now let's talk about potential issues that might come up, some of which we've canvassed earlier, so this will be quick. Firstly, definitions. A definition is only invalid if it is undebatable. If there is just no way to negate it, basically. If it's just unreasonable, that doesn't make it invalid. But that is something that you should consider. Something is unreasonable if its actual link to the wording of the topic is quite far. So if it's stretching some of the words, or if it's really not contextual.
In Australs, when I was in a panel, we had a debate where the AF did a bit of a weird definition, and the chair, in explaining his adjudication, had awarded the other team for their response to an unreasonable definition. Is that legit?
Yeah. Award the negative team that meets the affirmative halfway on a issue. It's tough to do this, right? Because in effect what you're doing is like inflating points for the negative team. To just be like, maybe if that was the original topic you might not have won, but you did here. I just think it's reasonable to say the negative team had less time to respond. They were able to respond effectively. I think the affirmative team did not choose the most reasonable or even a particularly reasonable definition. But keep in mind, just because you didn't think of that definition of the motion doesn't mean it's invalid and doesn't mean it's unreasonable either. It's got to actually be manifestly unreasonable for you to like apply this, which is like a bonus credit scheme, you know? So it's only if there's like a lack of a logical connection to the topic that you should really employ this. You shouldn't be using this to correct what you see as a weighting in the topic. That's not your job. It's the Adj Corps' job to set evenly weighted motions. You have to proceed on the assumption that they are evenly weighted unless there's some kind of squirreling weird definition.
If it's invalid, do you do something or just let it stand down or whatever?
If it's invalid, the negative team has two options. They say they can either definitionally challenge and say that topic is invalid, it has zero link to the motion. Instead, we're going to debate the motion. Here's what you should have said, affirmative team. You should have said that we should do this. Here's our response to that. The other thing they can do is say, this is a crap definition. We will debate it anyway. Here is one or two responses that we have in what will be no doubt a shaky first neg speech, and that's when you really reward them.
Can they do both?
Yes, it actually gets really hard
because
you end up having two simultaneous debates, right? And like then you see third speakers have three themes, and each theme has two halves.
Yeah.
And they go, okay, on the theme of the community, in their debate, we said the reason they were wrong was blah, blah, blah. In our debate, we said the reason we were right was this, this, this. And then you just have like a horror show. But yes, it's theoretically possible. Next, third speakers and new matter. You all know the rules, right? No new matter for third speakers. Third apps are technically allowed it, but I actually think you should treat new matter at third affirmative and third negative exactly the same. And that is like this. Be reasonable and penalise them, but you almost never totally ignore the matter. Here's why. You can't pretend like a speaker didn't speak for 8 minutes. Just because they're breaking one of the rules that we said about new matter at the end of the debate, doesn't mean like you can just pretend that the speech never happened. They put matter into the debate. More to the point, you have listened to it. It will affect your decision. It is something that is present, so you may as well acknowledge it, but also acknowledge that you are penalising it. Be willing to say if that argument had come out earlier, if it had been developed more fully, if it had been defended throughout the debate, it might have been a debate-winning argument, but it wasn't in this circumstance. Penalise it, but don't ignore it. Does that make sense? That way, we still have all the disincentives for, third neg coming out with a whole new case, but we're reasonable because, I just think you can't ignore the fact that someone speaks for 8 minutes, otherwise there's almost no point. Yes?
So I know it's not immediately relevant, but to what extent do you let POIs come into that as well? If they take a POI immediately after bringing in something that could technically be new, take a question on it, or if they bring out something new in POIs, what's your thoughts on that?
You just treat it exactly the same. If there is a response from them about that new matter, that's good. It doesn't change the fact that it would have been stronger earlier on. And this is also where, if there's new matter, particularly on the third negative, I would then have a real good look at the affirmative case and see if there's anything in there that could have answered that new matter. And that's where I'd be willing to be a little bit charitable to the affirmative and say, well, actually, I thought that second argument of the first speaker could probably have responded to this, right? And so they never got a chance to use that, but I'm willing to be charitable and say that neutralises it.
Just a tiny little semantic thing that really irks me when I get into adjudication. If someone says, this came out at the app or neg and it shouldn't have, but I gave it weight, I realise that's a legitimate way to adjudicate, but that annoys me so much as a speaker when they're just like, I shouldn't have, but I did.
Right.
Is there a way to phrase that where you can kind of go, I gave it weight, but
Yeah, you say, this came out at third,
Yeah.
I did not ignore it, but it was substantially weaker than it would have been had it come out earlier.
Okay, sure, so just sort of invalidate
Yeah.
it a little.
Yeah, and here's the thing, if you're approaching the debate the way that we were talking about before, if you're analysing it like that, then chances are it's not going to be a major issue, because major issues are major because they've been a big part of the debate so far, and so it's very hard for that to be debate-winning analysis. And if it is, then it is, you know?
Yeah.
If that really is debate-winning analysis, I think it's worse for you to ignore it than not to.
Yeah, yeah, no, I just put it.
You just got to make it a low-scoring debate for that team, a really narrow margin, where it might otherwise have not been. Other potential issues include, any point now, burden. Not a big deal. Teams can say they have whatever burden they want. They can put whatever burden they want on another team. It's going to piss off the speakers.
It's going to piss off you.
It can piss off you, but you just ignore it. You decide what someone has to prove based on the debate. You know, if someone has said that they're going to solve world poverty, that's what they have to prove that their model or whatever does.
Oh, that actually, if they set up, like, you know, we have to prove X, Y, and Z, and then suddenly abandon one of those points.
Yeah, only if they have to under the model that they've run or the impetus they've given themselves or the topic.
Yeah, exactly. If they give themselves that impetus, can you be like, yeah, you really, like, you know, shove yourself in the foot?
Yeah, probably. If people claim a higher burden. But remember that they can still win the debate, right?
Sure.
If they still prove benefit that is greater than what the negative is suggesting, if they still meet some of their burdens that you decide that they have, they can still certainly win the debate, but it can be harder.
Just wasted time, right? If you set yourself a higher burden,
Yeah.
you don't go about proving
Yeah, not just wasted time, but it's slightly easier for the negative team, because they say, you're causing X, Y, Z harms, and you're not even doing this, which is how negative teams work. Always. Negative cases. Do you guys know what a pure negation is?
That's when you don't prove anything new or something.
Yeah.
You just like say that's shit.
A pure negation is where the negative doesn't defend anything on its own, it just negates, it just attacks what the affirmative team brings. These are not as big an issue as people like to make out they are. Because here's the thing, most of the time, there's an implicit defense of the status quo in what the negative team is doing. Because what they're saying is, affirmative, you proposed this model, here's all of these problems with the model. What's implicit in that? That the status quo is better. And the status quo doesn't have X, Y, Z problem. Now, you should treat that like any other missing piece of matter. They didn't articulate their solution, they didn't defend the status quo like their model, and so you should treat it like that, under-analysed, bad matter. But a pure negation, like we said, is not invalid, but also it's not that big a deal, because it usually involves an implicit defence of the status quo. Does that make sense?
Just in the like really rare circumstance, like even rarer, if someone fucks up the topic word, like it's a reverse worded topic where the app is like advocating status quo.
Yep.
It doesn't happen often, but it can happen. And I suppose like, what would you do? What? Hello.
That's fine, that's fine.
Then the neighbour runs a pure negation case on that.
Yeah, they're still defending a world without the affirmative team's model, right? So they're still defending some kind of world because they think it's better than what the affirmative run.
So it's really weak, but not like.
Yeah, it just makes things weaker for them because they don't defend anything. Negative teams have a hard time winning if they don't say, here's the principle we support, here's the world that we want, right? So they're just not as likely to win as an affirmative team who have those things maybe more inbuilt in the model and inbuilt in the topic. But it doesn't mean that much, pure negation. Pure negations are logical requirements, like it's not a rule. You just need to have a negative team stance, not because we say you do, because logic dictates that if you don't think the status quo is better than what the affirmative team is saying, then you need to have something else. And if you do think the status quo is better, tell us why. Finally, false facts. Remember, you're the average reasonable person coded with not factor obvious or another team calls one. We went through this before. This is, yeah.